I used to believe my marriage was strong. We had built a life together, one that looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful home, a successful husband, and our son, Aiden, who was the light of my life. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. My husband became more of a presence in theory than in reality. Business trips stretched longer, phone calls became shorter, and our conversations were reduced to the necessities of daily life. At first, I didn't question it. This was normal, wasn't it? People got busy. Relationships evolved. But over time, the loneliness settled in, creeping into my bones like a cold I couldn't shake. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The man I married was slipping away, and I had no idea how to reach him. Aiden noticed. He always did. Even at 17, he had a way of reading me that sometimes felt too perceptive. "You okay, Mom?" He'd ask casually, but his eyes held the weight of real concern. I'd smile, ruffle his hair, and reassure him that I was fine. But I wasn't. I poured my energy into routines, cleaning, cooking, making sure Aiden had everything he needed. I convinced myself that as long as I kept moving, I wouldn't have to think about the emptiness growing inside me. But it was there, lingering in every unreturned message, every missed call. Every night, I went to sleep alone. One evening, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Pictures of our family, smiling, happy, untouched by the silence that now filled our home. I barely recognized that woman, the one with bright eyes, full of love and laughter. When had she disappeared? And more importantly, could she ever come back? Max, our golden retriever, patted over and rested his head on my lap. His warmth was comforting, a silent presence that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. I stroked his fur absent-mindedly, my mind drifting to thoughts I didn't want to entertain. I wasn't unhappy. Not really. But I wasn't happy either. I was stuck. Trapped in a marriage that felt more like a partnership of obligation than love. I told myself I had no reason to complain. My husband wasn't cruel, he wasn't unfaithful, at least, I didn't think he was. He provided for us, for me. So, why did it feel like I was slowly disappearing? That night, after Aiden had gone to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. I could text my husband, ask how his trip was going, try to bridge the ever-widening gap between us. But I already knew how it would go. A short, distracted response. Maybe a half-hearted miss you too, if I was lucky. Instead, I did nothing. I set my phone down, leaned back against the cushions, and let the loneliness settle in. I didn't know it then, but that silence, that emptiness, was about to lead me somewhere I never expected. It started with a simple conversation, one I hadn't even planned on having. I was at the grocery store, distracted, lost in thought, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned to see Liam, an old friend from college. We had fallen out of touch over the years, but seeing him now, it was like no time had passed. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on the basics. He had recently moved back to town after his divorce. He laughed about how strange it was to live alone again, how quiet his house felt. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. The conversation flowed easily, a reminder of how effortless connection used to feel. When I got home, I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. Not in the way of longing, but in a way that unsettled me. I had spent so long feeling invisible, and in one brief exchange, I had felt seen again. It was a dangerous feeling. A few days later, we ran into each other again, this time at a coffee shop. He waved me over, and before I could think of an excuse, I sat down. We talked for nearly an hour. It was refreshing, someone who asked about my life and actually listened. I had forgotten what that felt like. The next time we saw each other, it was planned. A lunch that I justified as innocent. It wasn't a date, just two old friends catching up. But something in me knew better. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years, spent a little extra time on my hair. When he complimented me, I felt warmth spread through me, a kind of validation I hadn't realized I craved. The messages started soon after. At first, they were harmless. A joke here, a comment there. But soon, they became more frequent. I found myself checking my phone more often, smiling when I saw his name. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it and saw his message. "Thinking about you today." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. My husband was still at work. Aiden was in his room, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just me and Liam. I typed a response, something light, something safe, but the fact that I was responding at all felt like a line I wasn't sure I should be crossing. I convinced myself it was nothing. Just attention, just conversation. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. I told myself I could stop anytime, that it wasn't serious. But with every message, every lingering glance, I felt myself slipping further into something I couldn't fully control. I went to bed that night with my phone on my nightstand, my husband's name and Liam's name right next to each other in my recent messages. One felt like a duty. The other felt like a choice. And I was starting to wonder how long I could keep pretending it didn't matter. I woke up to the sound of my door creaking open. Still half asleep, I turned over, expecting to see the dim outline of my husband, but it wasn't him. It was Aiden. He stood there, hesitating, his face partially lit by the glow of my phone screen on the nightstand. "Mom?" His voice was quiet, unsure. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "What's wrong?" He stepped further into the room, his eyes flicking toward my phone before meeting mine. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. I had this weird feeling like something was off. A lump formed in my throat. I forced a smile. "It's late, honey. You should go back to bed." He hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he might leave. But then his gaze shifted again. This time, lingering on the phone beside me. My heart rate spiked. I knew what he saw. The unread message from Liam, the preview flashing words I shouldn't have let exist in the first place. Who's Liam? The question was direct, and for a 17-year-old, his voice carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I swallowed hard. He's just a friend. Aiden didn't move, didn't blink. Does Dad know about him? The air in the room thickened. It wasn't an accusation, not yet, but it was close. My own son, standing in front of me, seeing through the excuses I hadn't even spoken yet. He's an old friend from college, I said, trying to keep my voice even. We've been catching up. Aiden's expression didn't change. He wasn't a child anymore. He was old enough to understand the cracks in a relationship, old enough to notice the way my smiles never quite reached my eyes anymore. And now he was old enough to see me for what I was becoming, someone who was standing on the edge of something irreversible. "Mom," he said softly, "does talking to him make you happy?" I exhaled sharply, caught off guard. Out of everything he could have asked, I hadn't expected that. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Because the truth was yes. Liam made me feel heard. He made me feel wanted. And admitting that, even just to myself, felt like the first real betrayal. Aiden sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what's going on between you two, and I don't need to. But I know you. And I know you wouldn't be talking to him this much if something wasn't missing." The words landed like a punch to the gut. I looked at my son, at the concern in his eyes, at the way he was trying so hard to understand something no child should have to. "I don't want to see you get hurt," he continued. "Or Dad. Or us." Guilt settled deep in my chest. In trying to fill the emptiness inside me, I hadn't stopped to think about how it might spill over, touching the people I loved most. Aiden waited for me to say something, anything. But I had no words. Finally, he nodded to himself, then turned to leave. Before he stepped out, he said one last thing, quiet, almost hesitant. "I just hope you don't forget what really matters." The door clicked shut behind him, and I sat there, staring at my phone, my heart pounding. I had spent so much time convincing myself this was harmless. But now, for the first time, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, everything felt different. Aiden's words lingered in my mind, replaying over and over. I went through my routine like normal, making breakfast, checking emails, tidying up, but there was an unease in my chest that wouldn't go away. I glanced at my phone, half expecting another message from Liam. And there it was. A simple good morning. It should have made me smile like it always did, but today it felt different. He was becoming a habit, something I reached for when the silence became too loud. I picked up the phone but didn't reply. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. When had I become this person? The woman who hid her phone when her son walked into the room? The woman who hesitated before answering simple questions about her own life? I wasn't proud of what I had let happen, but the hardest part was admitting that I had let it happen at all. Later that day, my husband came home early. It was unexpected, something that used to excite me. But instead of running to greet him, I froze. Guilt sat heavy on my chest. He kissed my forehead, setting his bag down with a sigh. "Long day," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "I missed you." The words hit me harder than they should have. I had been convincing myself for so long that he didn't notice me anymore, that he had pulled away first. But now, standing in front of him, I wasn't sure that was ever true. Maybe I had stopped trying just as much as he had. I forced a smile. "I missed you too." He looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing something different. "You okay?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pretend everything was fine. But Aiden's voice echoed in my mind. "Does talking to him make you happy?" I took a breath. "I think we need to talk." His brows furrowed, concern flickering in his eyes. "About what?" For the first time in months, I felt the urge to be honest. About the loneliness, about the distance, about everything I had been avoiding. Maybe I wasn't the only one who felt it. Maybe he had been waiting for me to say something all along. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, my phone buzzed. "Liam." My husband glanced at it, his expression unreadable. I reached for the phone, my fingers hesitating over the screen. I could reply. I could keep walking down this road, pretending it wasn't leading somewhere dangerous. Or I could stop. With a deep breath, I turned the phone over, face down on the counter. Then I looked at my husband. I don't want us to keep pretending everything is okay." His expression softened, and for the first time in a long time, we stood there, truly present with each other. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, instead of looking elsewhere, I needed to start looking right in front of me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only choice that really mattered.